Hey, what's up, man? Happy Sunday.
What's going on, man? I just wanted to play a quick sound bite real quick. Let's test this out.
Hey,
Welcome back.
okay. My man showing off now.
This is a little intro, figuring it out part two. Not the
Hey,
name of the podcast, but we here.
hey, you know what? That might have to be the name of the podcast, bro, at this point. Figuring it out.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how unique that would be, but hey.
I mean, that's true, but it seems to be the catchphrase,
Yeah, yeah. Definitely,
It's
definitely.
symbolic.
Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, man. And I know we were talking a little bit before we got live here, about what we wanted to talk about today. And what came to us is the responsibility of intention. The responsibility
Ooh.
of intention. Like when you hear that, like what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, sure. So responsibility of intention. To me, the first thing that comes to mind is holding yourself accountable, and doing things because you're mindful of it. But I'll let you kind of go more in depth about how you define it and what you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think you really hit the head on the nail there with that definition. Yeah, holding yourself accountable to, I'm trying not to use the word intention in the definition, but saying what you say you're gonna do, right? You know, your actions being aligned with your vision, right? With how you see your life or a specific situation. And I think, this kind of like how we got into this conversation, but like I'm realizing the older that I get, that it's that much more important to be intentional with how you want to direct your life, and I think that it seems kind of like obvious that like we have to live a life of intention, but I guess for me sometimes what happens is I don't realize like how particular that I need to be in order to get certain results in my life. And when I say particular, I'm not necessarily saying that I need to have every single detail like granular, but
Mm,
I definitely need to be mindful about what kind of outcomes am I looking for, right? And then more importantly, just than just outcomes, but like what type of behavior do I need to have in order to drive those outcomes? And also accepting that those behaviors are not going to guarantee the outcomes. However, the best influence that I have on those outcomes is my behavior and my mindset and my overall approach to anything that I go after in life.
I'm just gonna step in real quick. I think first and foremost, after defining it, I think what's important is why is it important? Like, why is it important to be intentional, right? I think when we're younger, it doesn't really matter as much, but when we get older and there's responsibilities on our plate, um, we're obviously getting older, and we realize time is limited. So if we want to see the results and the lifestyle and the change that we want for ourselves, and we're aware that time is limited, then we really need to be intentional with the time that we utilize. I think that's a key part that you had mentioned, off camera as well, that, I like instantly resonated with. But yeah, so just wanted to put that in there. So go ahead.
No, definitely, definitely. And I think I think a large part of that is because, as we get older, like our responsibilities increase, right? And hence the responsibility of intention, like a little
Mm.
bit of a play on words there. But like the responsibility to be intentional
Right, right.
and also understanding that there's a lot of responsibility that comes our way as we get older, and as we kind of like progress in our lives. And I think that's one of the things that I don't, it's not that I didn't know it, but I'm not sure that I like fully maybe kind of grasp this concept, if that makes sense. But it's
Okay.
like anything that we want to have, right? With great power comes great responsibility. I think that's probably like the simplest way for me to like tee this up is
Okay.
like, okay, like, you know, we want to have, I'm gonna say all of us, but like if we want to have a family, like that comes with responsibility. Like if we want to have, millions and billions of dollars, that comes with responsibility, right? If we
For
want to
sure.
have like a meaningful impact in our world, that comes with responsibility. If we want to have a healthy, fit body, that comes with responsibility, right? So it's
Absolutely.
like, what was that?
And I was agreeing with you.
Oh
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And that's kind of like one of the things that I'm just like, man, like it almost feels like it's like a sliding, like life is like a sliding scale almost, you know what I mean? And like I'm realizing like as I navigate through life that even the fun things that I want to do, like there's a level of responsibility that's involved in me doing
Mm.
those things, right? Um, I'll give you an example. Like one of the fun things that I enjoy doing is actually getting in the studio, recording some music, right?
Yeah.
And as fun as that is for me, it requires effort. It requires planning. It requires organization. It requires intention, right? What kind of songs do I want to create?
You gotta
Like,
have a plan for it, right? You gotta.
yeah, yeah. And I think that, like, you know, I think for me, like, you know, I don't want to harp too much on the studio stuff, but like going into the studio, and I work with this great producer out in Brooklyn. Um, I'm paying him for that studio time, right? So, I think the first time I went there, I just had like fun or whatever. And then, I gave him his money and I was just like, damn, like, you know, I really want to make sure that this time is worth it. And more so than just the money of paying for the studio time, like it was the time. Like getting his time was difficult, is difficult.
Mm. Right.
And I don't mean that in a bad ways. He's a busy guy. I'm a busy guy. So when I'm there, there's kind of like I don't want to lollygag. You know what I mean? Like I want to
100%.
make sure that that time is productive, not even just because I'm paying him, but because like the time is just so limited in itself. So again, like something like that, like I'm having fun, like going in the studio and kind of like creating like music, like really more so for myself. Not necessarily for like a specific initiative. Like
Yeah.
that requires a lot of intention and ultimately like the responsibility of wanting to do that is definitely there.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So, one thing I want to touch into is kind of how you were kind of, going into the specific part of you having fun, right? What I kind of wanted to touch base on, which we started with, is kind of the general scape of intentionality. That's a word. Which is, you know, there's decisions that you have to make if you want to have fun. You can have fun scrolling through YouTube and TikTok and things like that, or you can be intentional and realize, hey, this is a hobby of mine. Let me, you know, intentionally put some time into it. Let me have fun my way, right? So I'm not doom scrolling on Reddit or whatever, right? So I think I think first and foremost, before we get into the specifics, if you just focus on the general, like the general intentionality of things, then the rest of it kind of flows, right? Like, for example, we didn't have to be here. right? We didn't have to be recording. We didn't have to have this conversation, but we were intentional with it, and it doesn't really matter where it goes, right? For instance, because we were intentional with this, we planned it out. We put in the effort to set things up, things like that, right? So those parts of it, those elements of it, the sub layers comes automatically once you like focus on the intentional big picture. So that's kind of what I like to think about, you know?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, to your point, like, starting a podcast and, you know, even today, like just getting on the mic and having this conversation. I think there's a quote that I saw not too long ago, but I believe it said, as you start to walk, the path appears.
I like that.
And I was just like, damn, that's so good, you know?
Yeah.
And it's so good, not just because I like the quote, but more so like what the quote means and what it represents and how I'm able to like see that manifest like into my own life, right? Um, you know, I think a lot of times, especially for someone like me, like I feel like a lot of my life like kind of needs to be I need to know the answers before I take action, right? I
You're
need
not
to
alone there.
like I want, if I'm being honest, like in many ways, like I want to have like guarantees,
Mm,
like and when I do something and um I think in general, like, obviously we as we navigate life, like we want to ensure that the fruits of our labor, bear fruit, right? But what I'm realizing is like the only thing that you can quote unquote guarantee is you intentionally putting effort into something and allowing kind of like those outcomes to be manifested based on your efforts and your intentionality.
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the same thing with anything. Like an ROI is not guaranteed, but you plan it, you do your best, and if you're strategic and you know think of like the best ways to do things, you're gonna get an ROI for sure. It's not guaranteed, but most likely it's kind
Yeah.
of like that.
And I think to your point, for me specifically, like what I'm realizing that the ROI sometimes might be like the return might just be like a learned experience. You know what I mean? Like I might do something, invest a lot of time, energy, and even money. And the
Yeah,
return for me may not be like tangible, right? It
hundred
might be
percent.
like, hey, this was a learning experience. And that's the return on my investment. And I think
Yeah,
like being accepting of that is not always easy, right? Because, you know, a lot of times there can be a lot of attachment to like wanting things to work out a certain way. But, as I've learned to like surrender, and when I say surrender, I mean that in the most positive way possible. But like as I like surrender to like life and like, God's plans for me, I realize that it's really important for me to be open in that way because there's so much that's not in my control, right?
of course,
And what's in my control is not so much what happens to me, but how I respond to what happens to me.
100%. I wanna touch base on um kind of furthering this topic in a now more practical sense, if you will. So a little soundbite there. I just want to
Hey.
test it out. But yeah. So we kind of understand the importance of being intentional, right? Like we kind of get that. But how do we do that? How do we do that? So one thing I realized just looking for my past, and I feel like this is relatable for a lot of people too, which is that in high school, like all the way up until high school, you have this structure kind of in place for you, right? Matter of fact, in elementary school, middle school, they give you agenda books to like write down when your homework is, write down when the tests are coming, right? And all the way up until high school, there's a strict class schedule, right? There's a you know what you're doing up until like the afternoon time, late afternoon time, right? And once you get into college, that kind of goes out the window. It's kind of like, hey, you've been doing this for long enough. Now figure it out on your own. Just repeat the process, right? And a lot of people don't really understand that that's what it is, and they end up kind of like floating through the process, right? And they're not grounded and they're not intentional, which is kind of what we're talking about. And they're so one thing I realize is having a schedule really helps. Like it really helps to be intentional, right? I'll get hit ups from my friends like, yo, come out. It's Tuesday evening. They're like, yo, come out, let's hang out. Right. And if I'm not thoughtful about it, I might just go hang out. Right. Which does happen. And what ends up happening is now what I had originally planned for Tuesday evening, which might have been getting some extra work done, things like that, gets, out the window. So I think like setting structure in our lives will enable us to have that intention, process done completely in the right way, I should say.
Yeah, definitely. And I think part of that is like being able to identify like what what it is that we want, right? And what kind of outcome we're looking for, and then
Mhm.
starting to build the structure and intentionality that kind of like precedes that. And if I'm being transparent, like there's a lot of times where I do go with the flow. Um,
Mm.
and there's definitely a benefit to going with the flow, right? At times, but it's not, it should not be like a default like path or
Mode. Yeah,
mode
yeah,
exactly to like navigate anything, right?
for
Like there
sure.
needs to be a balance, right? Like you don't want to be completely rigid with how you want to go about something,
Mm.
life, relationships, career, finance, whatever sector in your life that might be. But at the same time, you don't want to be completely like just frolicking and just going with the flow, right? Because you're setting yourself up to, you're honestly setting yourself up to be disappointed. Even if I think we navigate life through a place of like having no expectations, and I know sometimes that's kind of like a theme of like, oh, go navigate life through no expectations, and I think that like to an extent I understand it, but I think we got to be very careful about like what does that actually mean, right? To navigate life with no expectations. And I think for me, the way that I internalize that statement is I think I take that in as like I don't want to navigate life from a place of um being hung up on like an expectation. You know what I mean? Or being hung
Yeah.
up on a particular outcome. But still having a desired outcome for whatever it is that I might do.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think they're kind of separate. I think having intentions, it's separate from results, and
Mm,
it's separate from expectations. I think you could have expectations. You don't need to have expectations. Whatever the case, it doesn't affect your intention, right? For example, I could intend to have, uh, like for example, I intend on like let's say being a better partner in a relationship, whatever, right? Let's just say that's the intention, right? So if that's the intention, then you could live your life through that intention. You don't need to have expectations. You can have expectations, but it doesn't impact the intention that you set, right? You can intend to say, for example, I will commit once a week towards my relationship. right? Or towards my friendships, whatever the case, whatever your intention is. It doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to pan out that way, but it centers and grounds you into you thinking about what's important in your life. And I think that's the key takeaway here, which is figure out what's important in your life and make sure you're conscious of it. Make sure you're not just going with the wind in terms of you not knowing what's important in your life, right? And it's okay if you're going with the flow, like if people change plans, if something doesn't work out, it's fine. But at least you had that concrete idea in your head and you were grounded.
Yeah. No, 100%, man. I like the way that you put that. I like the way that you put that. Um, do you feel like do you ever feel like discouraged to set intentions?
That's a good question. Let me think about that for a sec. Do I feel discouraged to make intentions or set intentions? No, but I'll tell you what I mess up on, which is I'm intentional about things, but I'm intentional about things that may not be as valuable as I think they are. You know what I'm saying?
Ooh, yes, yes, yes.
Yes. So I'll like value something, but I may not have the insight to really think deep down and say, hey, you know what? Like, is this actually serving me? Is it actually? You
Oof.
know? So I think that's the question that I need to ask myself more. Well, what about for you?
Wow. Wow. Hey, man, it's gonna be hard for me to answer this question because you just blew me away with that one because it was really, really, really hitting for me.
Throw it in there.
No, for sure, man.
I'm kidding.
Listen, I think like the reality and the acceptance of setting an intention and coming to the realization that that intention may not serve me. I think that's like a really, really, especially as I get older, it's a really, really difficult thing for me to accept at times. But it's like the reality, right? Because I think there's an expectation of myself that like as I get older, I'm going to be able to set better intentions. And I think, yes, I am able to do so, but that doesn't guarantee that I'm going to have like 100% success rate with all the
For sure.
intentions that I set, right?
For sure.
And not specifically towards the outcome, but specifically around like, man, like did I really need to set that intention like for myself? You know what I mean? Um, but to kind of go back to the question I asked you when, do I ever feel discouraged to set intentions? I would say
Yeah.
I do at times,
Okay.
and I think part of that is because like, I want to be right with the intentions that I set. You know what I mean? Like I want to, I want to be sure that the intentions that I'm gonna set are like are ultimately going to serve me, and I think it
Exactly.
kind of goes back to like what you just said. So, um, you know, but like part of it is like, um, kind of trusting yourself, right? And just understanding that like I'm gonna have different phases of my life. Like there's gonna be points in my life where, me setting an intention that I may not set in a year, like in this phase of my life, I might set an intention that I may not set next year, right? Or 6 months down the line, because I'm just not going to be in that space at that time. You know what I mean? And
That's true.
like, let me see if I can give you an example. Like, I think for me, like one of the intentions that I've been setting recently has been to be a lot more connected to like like the relationships in my life, friends, family, etc., right?
Yeah.
That's a very important intention for me to do right now. In 6 months, it's not to say that that won't be important, but that may not be like the primary intention, or it may not hold as high as a priority for me if 6 months down the line I'm really trying to like lock in and focus on um something else that I might be looking to accomplish, right? Like at that time, like let's say I'm trying to write a book or something, you
Right.
know,
It won't be the focus. Like you're not doubling down on building relationships as much as just maintaining it and focusing more on your book. Yeah,
bingo, bingo,
I gotcha.
bingo. Yeah, man.
So
But
sorry, let me just throw something in
yeah.
there. So let's say in that scenario, right? I think it's also important to go a level deeper, which is to be intentional with the type of relationships you're building. Like, yeah, your
Mm,
overall focus is like building relationships. Right? That's the focus, but let's be even more intentional about like where you're putting your time,
mm,
right? Like, because you might have some close friends, you might have acquaintances that you might want to have a better relationship with, but then there also might be some people that they're cool, but you don't see them in your life in the long term. So is that somewhere you want to put your time into? Like that's a question too, right?
yeah. No, 100%. 100%. Um, I think in general it definitely serves us to kind of like question ourselves, not in a doubtful kind of way,
Mhm.
but in a guiding kind of way on a regular basis.
So that was gonna be my next point into the episode, which is what are some good questions to ask ourselves in order to be more purposeful, mindful, intentional in our lives.
Yeah, um I think one of the things that I feel like I can like answer that question kind of easily is first kind of starting like what is the overall vision that we have for our lives, right?
Mm,
Like what do we want our lives to mean, right? And
okay.
that question is different than what do we want to accomplish, because what we want our lives to mean comes first, and what we want to accomplish is a branch under
Okay.
that overarching vision. And I think a lot of times, even myself, if I'm not intentional, um, I'll confuse what I want my life to mean with what I want to do. And those are two separate conversations. So for me, it's starting with that overarching question and like letting everything else trickle down from there.
Okay, I see. So can we like just do a sample? Just like let's say I just graduated college. I'm trying to figure out my life. I got my career that I'm striving to get into. Let's just say, I don't know, I'm trying to get into medicine. I'm applying to med school, things like that. Um, and in between, like that's kind of like an overarching theme, but other than that, I'm not really intentional about my lifestyle, right? So, how would you start if I were to have this exercise with myself? How would we start this?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways to start.
Okay.
The first thing that comes to mind is I really want to be really deep,
Mm,
um, which is good. Sometimes I'm too deep for a situation. um, and I'll give you an example. You know, um, so I remember years ago. I can't remember exactly what year. I think it was definitely pre-pandemic. When I came to your college, my alma mater.
yes,
Your alma mater as
sir.
well. Um, and I did a workshop there. And
Mm,
honestly, I can't even remember the name of the workshop, but I remember I had everyone like write an obituary. Yeah, and I think you were there as well, man.
I was
Um,
just thinking that. I was like, I think I was there for that one.
yeah, yeah. And you know, for people that are listening, they're like, "What the hell did this guy just say?" Like,
Yeah.
so essentially, just to break this down very simply, is I did an exercise with the students at your college at the time, and
Mm,
I had them essentially like write an obituary of themselves, right? Like writing down like what they want their lives to mean. Like what would the most important people in their lives whether they know who those people are now or whether it's people that will ultimately, become a part of their lives, like future family members, children, things of that nature. Um, what would those individuals say about your life? And more importantly, what would you want them to say about your life? Right.
Yeah,
And we
I love
use
that.
that framework to help us backtrack to today. Right. Because if we're thinking about like that, the end of life, right? If we're thinking about the end of life, how
Yeah,
can we reverse engineer our lives to be in alignment with how we see the end of our lives?
I gotta clap that one, man. That was great. Especially when you mentioned reverse engineering, because that was like the one word that was like coming into my head while you were saying, that because I'll link it to a few things, right? In software development, when you have a problem, right? And I used to be a comp sci major back in college before I was an accountant. So I did a little bit of coding. And when it came to certain problems in comp sci, in order to create a program, the best way to do it is to reverse engineer the solution, which is what does it look like? What's the final product looking like? And let's take it back one step at a time to the current. And that will give you the parts that you need to make the product, essentially. Right. So I really like that, that you mentioned that. And it seems to, and I mean, programming is basically instructions, right? That's the essential part of coding is this is an algorithm, this is instructions to get to the final product. And if you look at it that way, if you go the obituary route, it will help you figure out the instructions, the game plan for that moment. So I really like that. That was fire.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, no, and I like how you broke that down with computer science. For those who don't know what comp sci is,
Oh, sorry.
um, is like, and it just kind of goes back with like, right, why it's so important to start with like a vision, right? A vision is not a goal. It's kind of like that's why like the word vision is not it's not by accident that when they say like we need to have a vision for our lives, right? Um, the reason, in my opinion, that I believe we do need to have a vision for our lives is because we need something to kind of see and pursue as a way to like help navigate our lives.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean that makes sense. Oh man, there was a huge couple of good nuggets there. I love the obituary process. I think that's something that I have to do offline.
Yeah,
You know.
and I'll be honest with you, man. I thought about it not too long ago. I thought about that, and I was just like, man, like I kind of feel like I was ahead of my time back then because I haven't really done anything like that again.
Yeah.
And I don't remember where I put the one that I wrote, for my own life. So, you know, I mean, I definitely think like today, man, today was a great conversation. And if I'll be honest with you, I feel like you could probably go on like
Yeah, yeah.
conversation wise for another couple of hours on this topic alone, which I
For
think is
sure.
rich. But I definitely think this is a good place for us to like, kind of close out and be intentional about, the other responsibilities that we have in our lives.
Oh, ooh, I love that. I love that. That's true. That is true. All right, Patrick. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to our next session. I love our calls. I love catching up and the stuff that we discuss. We're still figuring it out, so
That's right.
let's keep doing that.
Yeah. And I'm hoping you end us off with a nice little soundbite.
Oh shoot, okay, let's do it.
Ooh. Oh, hey, hey, hey,
Hey,
hey,
hey,
hey,
hey,
hey, hey, hey,
Scooby-Doo.
hey, bye.
Hey, till next time. We'll catch you soon.
Peace.
We're just figuring it out.
Hey.
Peace.
Peace, man.